Great. Well, I think we can get started. Do you think, Ryan?
Yeah,
All right.
go ahead and
Well,
get started.
yeah, thank you so much, everybody. My name is Rachel Jolie, and I am the engagement editor at Belt Magazine. I'm so happy you're all here. This is our second time doing a sort of end of year event, and it's also coinciding with I also teach college, and so it's both times it's landed on the last week of my teaching semester. So this feels very celebratory for me. I'm super grateful to have a sort of closure celebration with amazing regional writers. So I'm really happy to be here, and I'm happy for everybody else who's here too. I'm going to pass it over to Ryan for a moment to tell you a little bit more about Belt Magazine, and then I'll talk a little bit again and introduce our panelists.
Awesome. Thanks, Rachel. So my name is Ryan Schnur. I'm the editor of Belt Magazine. Belt, you likely know what Belt is, but I'm going to give the quick rundown of our background. So Belt was founded in 2013, really to fill a need that the founder, Anne Trubeck, saw in stories that really took a nuanced view of the Rust Belt and Greater Midwest. She felt that taking a broad view of the media landscape, the stories that were written about the Rust Belt didn't come from Rust Belt people. They didn't seem to really endeavor to understand the region in a nuanced way. So she founded Belt to counter that, to produce context-driven, independent stories by local writers and photographers who could tell the stories the way that you can only tell them if you have a deep relationship with that place. And so that's what Belt is dedicated to. And we are a nonprofit 501c3 digital online publication. We're funded by a mix of grants, foundation support, individual donors, and especially memberships. And so right now I should plug that we are doing our end of year fund drive. And from now through December 31st, we have an opportunity via Newsmatch, which is an opportunity from the Institute for Nonprofit News, to double all of your memberships and donations. So we will drop a tip jar in the chat here. It's just a PayPal tip jar. So if you feel like tossing a few bucks our way, that'll be doubled and help us keep producing more great regional journalism and writing like the work that you're going to hear tonight. So the three writers here are in the Belt universe, are great contributors to the work that we do, telling these local stories. And I'm really excited to hear them read tonight, to share this work with you. And I'll just turn it back over to Rachel.
Thanks, Ryan. Before we get officially started, we do want to start with just a short land acknowledgement. At Belt, we know that the stories we tell about the Rust Belt are always stories about Indigenous land. Tonight, I'm speaking to you from Erie and Mississauga land, also called Cleveland. And we'd love if you took a moment to consider the original stewards of the Rust Belt town or whatever town that you're in. If you're not sure what land you're on, you can find it in this link I'm about to drop. This is the moment of truth. If I can multitask and copy, paste, and talk at the same time, usually never can as a teacher. So this is a great website to get familiar with the native land that you're on, if you're not already aware. We have a running series called Indigenous Rust Belt that's also a great way to learn more about the stories of and ways you can support Indigenous communities that are still flourishing in the region today. So thank you for that consideration. With that, I am so excited to introduce our panelists for the evening. Vivian Gibson, Gretchen, I'm so sorry, check your Kelwinski, right? Did I say it correctly? We had a little perfect. And Ed Simon. I genuinely love all three of these writers. It's been such a pleasure at Belt to be able to be even closer to the writing than I was when I was just a fan of it and a reader. And so I feel really, really close to all of these pieces, and I'm so excited for everybody to get to hear them. We will start with Ed Simon, and I'll pause in between each and introduce everybody. But to properly introduce Ed Simon is a staff writer for The Millions and a widely published freelance writer. His most recent book is An Alternative History of Pittsburgh from Belt. And this February, we will see the release of a very different book, Pandemonium, A Visual History of Demonology from Abrams. I'm super stoked to know more about that book. But back to another different Ed's going to talk to us about the holiday a little bit. So take it away, Ed.
Sure. And there's the Venn diagram there weirdly overlaps like a little bit between those two books. Not a whole lot, but a bit. So this piece, the working title was Blessed Nativity of Forbes Avenue. Okay. Inside the Carnegie Museum, there is a vaulted room that contains eternity. Entering that stolid gray building in chill winter, a skeleton of Pittsburgh steel and glass encased in Berea sandstone, inscribed with the names of dead worthies, stained black from mill exhaust. And you must first walk past the bus stop where people try to keep warm in their Steelers scarves. The whole scene guarded by guano-bedecked bronze statues of Bach, Galileo, Shakespeare, and Michelangelo, who forever watched the 67 make its way down Forbes Avenue. Moving down hallways of French marble, you reach the intimidating chamber unceremoniously named the Hall of Architecture. This cavernous space, the exact size of the decayed mausoleum at Halicarnassus's inner sanctum and lit by skylight, is a dimension independent of space and time, where a visitor can find the Venus de Milo, the Apollo Belvedere, the Nike of Samothrace. For a few weeks annually in December, the museum exhibits a more panoramic type of eternity in front of a massive red-hued cast of the Gothic west portal of St. Giles Abbey Church, a representation of when the infinite dwelled in a virgin's womb for a bit. Great little one whose all-embracing birth lifts earth to heaven, stoops heaven to earth, wrote the English poet Richard Crashaw in 1646. Son of a Puritan divine, Crashaw converted to Catholicism 2 years before he wrote this poem, and he spent the last 4 months of his life in Loreto, Italy, where the pious believe that the Basilica della Santa Casa contains the Virgin Mary's house. Only 5 decades after Crashaw died, and across the peninsula in Naples, where my maternal grandmother's family is from, artisans crafted the earliest figurines that would make up the Presepio, which is exhibited every Christmas in the Hall of Architecture. It's an elaborate Baroque Neapolitan nativity scene, composed of all the figures you would expect: shepherds and sheep, magi and angels, Joseph, Mary, and Jesus, but also a tableau of regular urban scenes from 18th century Naples. The Carnegie's Presepio is the most complete in the United States, with some 88 figures, each handmade between 1700 and 1830, most of whom have nothing to do with Christ's birth. People groggily look at the windows of their stone homes. Merchants hawk cheese and bread while a dog steals sausages. Couples fight, vagrants beg, children cry. Occasionally, there is the appearance of recognition concerning Christ's birth, masterfully conveyed in delicately painted brown eyes. But on the whole, most seem unaware. The anonymous hands who crafted these figurines made them look like family and neighbors, not because they thought that's what first century Judeans looked like, but because the nativity is always happening and the nativity is always different. I always feel the most Italian in December. Christmas seems the prototypical Italian holiday to me. All those red and green lights, the color of the flag, strung in front of plain red brick row houses that predominate in ethnic neighborhoods from South Philly to North Boston. Pots of frosted barren soil on the stoop where tomatoes grew a few months before, possibly a Mary on the half shell if there's enough space for a bit of yard, shots of sambuca and sugar sprinkled pizzelles. Driving down Liberty Avenue, which used to be lined with red sauce joints, is my preferred way to getting to the wholesale grocers of the Strip District, and where my family would go on Christmas Eve to the much missed Bankowitz's to gather materials for the night's traditional feast of the 7 fishes. Why 7? I've heard it represents the sins and virtues or the sacraments. Some opt for 9 after the months of Mary's pregnancy, or 12 for the apostles. It doesn't really matter. The most sacred things are always incidental. What matters is spaghetti with fatty tuna, salty anchovies, and briny capers, delicately fried smelts eaten heads, bones, and all, crab tossed with olive oil and cracked black pepper, rings of calamari dipped in arrabbiata, iced shrimp ringing a bowl of cocktail sauce, canned oysters gritty with silt and smoky with olive oil. Like me, Bankowitz's has a Jewish name, but it was mostly Italian. at least on Christmas Eve. Packed with Pittsburghers crowding into the store with its aquarium of ill-fated lobsters and the monger selling Canadian salmon and Maryland crab, the fry station where cod was served up under a foot of breading and whose best business still awaited the Fridays of Lent. The whole scene fit for a Presepio. There are, of course, fishermen plying their trade in that nativity, though their catch wasn't all that impressive. A few sad trout flopping on their nets, the infant Christ not yet in the business of multiplying loaves and fishes. Still, in the Presepio, there is food to be eaten, and nothing is more Italian to me than that. Christ is born, and now it's time for dinner. If there's any of a distinctly Italian spirituality, as separate even from Catholicism, it's this sense of the sacred and the profane mingling together, where the numinous is rendered in marble and concrete, brick and stone, terracotta and plaster. Maria Lorino describes the Carnegie's Presepio's fundamentals, writing in Were You Always in Italian? Ancestors and Icons of Italian America, that this is the commitment to a loving but imperfect God, whose heaven is as easy or as difficult to comprehend as the deeply flawed earth. In the Mezzogiorno, labor was long, comfort was rare, and food was often meager, which was all the more reason to delight when you can. You don't even pause life for the Messiah. Advent isn't the millennium. Excluding Joachim of Fiore, Italians don't do millennium. Ignoring Tommaso de Campanella, we don't reside in utopia. Ours is the religion of Di Donato's granule of earth beneath the footsteps of the living, and the Presepio expresses that. Christ is in his crib, but there are still debts to be paid, food to be purchased, meals to be prepared, diapers to be changed, aching backs that must rest, calloused feet that must heal. Our world is always combustible and imperfect, but that's what's beautiful about it. Here is the secret. If you search for Sabbath, for millennium, for utopia, it's already here. If Crashaw was right about anything, it's that heaven and earth can't help but intermingle. December is cold, but Christmas is warm. The solstice is dark, but Advent is bright. The Presepio shows ugliness, but it is beautiful. Paradise isn't a place, it's a moment. You find it in a dinner with your family. You find it in the filth of a manger. Behind the bus stop with its smell of stale cigarette smoke, you can see the calloused face of Christ. Beyond the limestone facade stained black from exhaust, you can hear the infant God still crying for his mother. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ed. Wow, it's just like food, architecture, ancestry, and so deeply like Rust Belt place-based. I just love how you wove that all together. Thank you. I'm excited for Q&A to talk more about it. But let's keep moving to Vivian Gibson. I consider Vivian my sort of Belt Publishing cohort member. We both had memoirs come out in the same year, and it's been a delight to be press family with Vivian. Vivian Gibson was raised on Bernard Street in Mill Creek Valley, 454 acres in downtown St. Louis, which comprised the nation's largest urban renewal project beginning in 1959. She started writing short stories about her childhood memories of the dying community after retiring at age 66. Her memoir, The Last Children of Mill Creek, from Belt Publishing in 2020, published when she was 70. Won the Missouri Humanities Council 2021 Literary Achievement Award, among lots of other recognition. This is I asked them for short bios. Vivian could have kept going. Lots of amazing recognition for your book and your amazing work. So Vivian, take it away.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm in St. Louis, and I'm at the land of the Osage Nation, and I'm reading for you tonight, Me Again. A cheerful happy holidays rang out at the close of the third Zoom book discussion in a week. In the shuffle of participants leaving the meeting and screen tiles repositioning, I couldn't tell who sent the well wishes as I blurted, "Same to you." Moments later, sitting in front of my blank computer screen and sipping the last of my tepid tea with a splash of bourbon, I realized Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's Eve would all come and go in the next 6 weeks. At a different time in my life, I would plan, make lists, decorate, shop for the season's activities. But with children scattered and the number of family and friends dwindling, I'm closing out the years no longer has the same import. I celebrate differently these days, my way. Pajamas all day, my favorite foods, a good book, or Netflix and chill. After this year, I welcome new traditions. I'll remember 2021 as a year of my reinvention again. You think I'd be done at age 72 with immersing myself in some new project I know little about, Googling terms, reading how-to books and articles as I march instinctively toward a yet unimagined accomplishment. Not so. Anne Trubeck, publisher and founder of Belt Publishing, recently recounted acquiring my book. And I'm quoting here, "She was just playing around with writing for the first time. We gave her a contract and a deadline. She wrote. We talked during the process. We edited some more, and then we published The Last Children of Mill Creek." Anne's matter-of-fact description of my road to authorship strays little from other forays in my life. I became a millinery designer in the early 1970s. I made hats and sold them to church ladies in Harlem and Brooklyn on weekends while working full-time and attending design classes at the Fashion Institute of Technology 3 nights a week. I was a print model briefly. My large rounded afro was one of the first pictured in Vogue magazine, and my aloof closed-mouth smile purposely hid a gold-crowned front tooth acquired as an impetuous teen. I started a corporate catering business in the mid-'80s. I later turned my secret ingredients into a line of hot sauces and seasonings. Vib's Caribbean Heat, sold online and in regional grocery stores and restaurants. Though I was never brave enough to quit my day jobs, my entrepreneurial spirit has survived to wrestle daily with my inclination toward pragmatism. Months before my publication date in April 2020, I read how-to guides about launching and promoting a debut book. But COVID-19 happened, and it mattered less that I didn't know what I was doing because all the rules changed. Everybody was scrambling to figure out the virtual ways of doing things. Luckily, the advanced reader copies had gone out from Belt's marketing department and the Times Literary Supplement, the Los Angeles Review of Books, St. Louis Magazine, and the St. Louis American newspaper all reviewed my book. An interview on the local NPR station elevated my memoir and me to a new level of interest. That was enough exposure for me to start building a virtual book launch campaign. Buoyed by opportunities to be transformed, I morphed into a book promoter while teaching myself to use social media. My book had been published and I was determined to sell it. COVID be damned. My memoir about growing up in a segregated St. Louis neighborhood, demolished in 1959 to extend an interstate highway, only mentioned urban renewal a few times. But the topic resonated prominently in interviews and discussions, drawing on striking similarities to the challenges facing many American communities today. As the saying goes, timing is everything. While the country grappled with real-time racial injustice playing out on live TV, my book provided little-known historical context for issues of systemic racial strife in the form of what the St. Louis housing activist of the 1960s, Ivory Perry, called Black removal by white approval. I can't help but think that the country's heightened interest in social justice drew attention to my book and made my writing more relevant in our contemporary context. I leaned in and embraced the growing discourse around urban renewal, displacement, disinvestment, and erasure of Black communities in St. Louis and around the country. The wide variety of groups seeking conversations about the place and the time I wrote about went far beyond the hoped for book clubs. Requests for me to speak came from professional urban planners and tour guide groups, middle and high school social studies teachers, university level urban studies and creative writing professors. Writing groups wanted to know about my writing process and research methods. An essay about becoming an author late in life for Poets and Writers magazine would lead to published excerpts in online magazines, more positive reviews, and amazingly, topping bookstores' bestsellers list for weeks. There were more speaking and writing opportunities than I can list here. Discussing past social topics and tying them to issues that still exist today would all be overwhelming if it weren't so instructive and just the right amount of scary for me to take it all very seriously. Looking back on what has brought me to this extraordinary juncture, I think about why my stories about family and a community nearly forgotten have such new importance. I'm drawn to a passage I recently read in James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time, 1963. In writing to his nephew, he penned, "One must say yes to life and embrace it whenever it is found. And it is found in terrible places. Nevertheless, there it is. Generations do not cease to be born, and we are responsible to them because we are the only witnesses they have." In this season of sharing and giving and renewal, I vow to reinvent myself again as witness. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Vivian. I'm never not inspired and talk ever. So thank you for that. What a gift. Just so everybody knows, the sort of, we themed this evening around holiday / end of year reflection. And I think if any of us are half as lucky to have half as many sort of things to reflect upon, the way that Vivian does in retirement, if we're not there yet, how lucky. So thank you, Vivian, for being aspirational. All right, last but not least, we have Gretchen Kalwinski, whose features, essays, and stories have appeared in Time Out Chicago, The Chicago Reader, Featherproof Books, Make Literary Magazine, and the Chicago Rust Belt Anthology. She has a master's in creative writing from Northwestern University, a strong interest in the Polish diaspora, currently writes and edits for the women's lifestyle site Jumble and Flow. Gretchen, go for it.
Thank you, and thanks, Belt. So this is titled originally Wigilia, the Epic Polish Christmas Eve 12-course feast. Here we go. My Indiana hometown isn't pretty. Peppered with smokestacks and smelling of refined corn. It's gray, hard, industrial. But on one day each year, I do find beauty there. Vigilia, which translates to vigil in English, is the epic Polish Christmas Eve feast. A solemn, sentimental celebration, it lasts hours and includes 12 meatless courses featuring mushroom soup, carp, herring, rye bread, pierogi, sauerkraut, gołąbki, honey vodka, and desserts like kolachki. It's a tradition that my refugee grandparents brought with them when they immigrated in the 1950s to this Rust Belt neighborhood teeming with Polish churches, delis, and bakeries. Other than their children, my grandparents had no US family, so it connected them to home. My family isn't exactly artsy. Some work at Mills or the electric company. My mother is a paralegal and my father is a social worker. But on Vigilia, everyone lets a little poetry and magic in. Growing up, I remember my mill worker grandfather singing folk songs, roughneck uncles donning fresh sweaters and haircuts, my mother eating as much dessert as she wanted, my father delivering eloquent blessings, my grandmother smiling, which was rare, my quiet brother telling jokes, and my sister coaxing everyone out of their shells. Each year, we'd spend days preparing for the feast. On the morning of Christmas Eve, we visit shops for fresh fish and bread. Then we decorate the tree and adorn folding tables with linens, china, and poinsettias. Once stars are visible in the sky, that's when we put on our holiday reds and sparkly tops. My grandmother's crystal catches the candlelight. Before the supper begins, we pass a platek, flat, flavorless wafers embossed with the nativity scene. Starting with the host, one at a time, each person breaks off a piece of the wafer, then kisses the person next to them and wishes them good fortune. Though the feast is family-centric, we often gather with friends before and after to break the oplatek and do vodka toast. Na starowi means to your health. Hosts always set out an extra chair and plate for unexpected visitors, both to represent Mary and Joseph and to symbolize absent loved ones. When I was growing up, one neighborhood family always held a late night after party and we'd play with the kids of my dad's boyhood friends, whom we called cousin, to this day. My grandparents' memories were complicated. Babsha worked in a forced labor camp and met my Jaja at a displaced persons camp in England. When I called their engagement romantic one time, Babsha snapped and said everyone had to form new families since so many of theirs had been killed. She told me the women used the same white dress for the many weddings each week. We continued Vigilia after my grandparents died in the early aughts. Sometimes we invited our friends to join, but since neither my siblings nor I have kids, our dinners shrank, becoming intimate, but rather lonely. We'd spend them reminiscing about my grandparents, whose reality was sometimes grim, burdened by the traumas of the past. My mother's Slovak family had already lost most of their customs. Without my grandparents' insistence on traditions and another generation to carry them out, what would our legacy be? I'd long forgotten the Polish I learned at language classes from when I was a kid. Without Vigilia, who was I? Then in 2007, my sister reconnected with our Polish family, traveling to Poland and visiting their village. She returned with my father in 2009 and gave him the chance to meet his actual first cousins, his aunts and his uncles for the very first time. For my part, I began mining photo albums and found a 1930s photo of a mystery woman linking arms with someone in a bear costume. Captivated, I made it my Facebook profile photo, and within days, a Polish man with my grandmother's maiden last name messaged me. "In your picture, I saw my father's mother," he said. "She was Władysław, and her daughter was Janka? If so, your family." My grandmother's name was indeed Janina, and we confirmed that he was my father's first cousin. Then in July 2017, my parents, brother, sister, and I traveled to Eastern Europe and began connecting names from my grandmother's stories to faces. As we spent time in their homes, we saw old photos of our graduations and holidays. We realized that since my grandparents had sent those family members our photos for decades, all of our relatives knew exactly who we were. We never needed to introduce ourselves to them. And not only that, our round upturned noses and wavy dark blonde hair was an exact match to theirs. During the trip, We visited the church where our family had worshiped for 600 years and reveled at a cousin's wedding. Over tea with his aunt, my dad, tata in Polish, turned to me and said, "They know us." In this town, a continent away, we, the Kalwinskis, were known. When we saw our name on hundreds of headstones on a graveyard, I started tagging my Instagram posts with ancestral homeland pilgrimage. Our relatives, being Polish, put out a new spread of food every few hours. A typical lunch was cutlets, carrot salad, sauerkraut, beets, pierogi, cordial, and torte cakes. The breakfasts were magnificent: compote, smoked fish, cheese, rye bread, yogurt, coffee, fresh mint tea, and sausage. Their spreads all harkened Vigilia for us, and during a broken conversation, we found that their Christmas Eve traditions were almost identical to ours, except that at their table's extra place setting, we had been the symbolic ghosts. Unlike us, they had a deep and wide sense of belonging, and we, the American family, were the only piece missing in their story. A week later, when we met my grandmother's family, we found my uncle's smirk identical to Babcia's, and that, like her, he was a vivid storyteller. We compared Vigilias and again found their traditions remarkably similar to our own. We ended the trip in a Slovakian village in the Tatra Mountains with the goal of locating my mother's great-grandmother's grave. When we found it, a worn cross, my stoic mother actually wept. It wasn't until I returned home to Chicago that it hit me, the enormity, the extent of everything that my ancestors had left behind when they left Europe. I began to feel myself a part of something ephemeral but important, something to do with land and storytelling. The Vigilia that followed that trip was different. When we passed the Oplatki, we remembered our ancestors, but the table no longer seemed small or lonely. We'd spent the weeks before the holiday exchanging cards with our Polish family. We'd liked each other's Instagram posts, and we'd used mushrooms foraged by Uncle Marek in our consomme. Over dessert, we imagined my grandparents as refugees, sailing the Queen Elizabeth, steeled for adventure. That day, I felt that same refugee hope, connected across continents and decades. I'm grateful for forging a real connection to my Polish family. But what affected me most deeply was the recognition that my grandparents' sheer will to survive was so strong that nothing could stop it, not war, prison, oceans, or illness. They, like all immigrants, conjured a life from thin air. Setting an extra place at Vigilia was a beautiful gesture, but in truth, the alchemy of creating kin where none existed was something that they'd practiced all year long for most of their lives. They learned to find family in their neighborhoods, churches, delis, bakeries, and pharmacies. And whether my siblings and I produce ancestors or not, that's something that we've taken into the world. That when you have nothing, you can still create something. You can still find your people. And so I'll never lose Vigilia because it's not just a tradition, it's a way of being. This year, the extra chairs on Christmas Eve will symbolize not just those who have died or who aren't present, but the family we have yet to meet, the ones who've been waiting to know us all along. There's always more vodka and oplatki to go around. Na zdrowie.
Thank you so much. Oh my goodness, beautiful. More vivid food descriptions and more ancestor stuff. I feel very warm and very excited for the discussion. I have questions for all three of you, but the audience, I would love if audience folks want to, Ryan, I'm not sure if you have access to that secret question board, but otherwise just put the questions in the chat and we'll make sure that that we get, is there a separate question and answer thing on the Zoom or just in the chat?
I think let's just use the chat. We do have the option to do that, but it seems kind of complicated. So
okay, all right, great. So if you have questions for any of our readers, please do put it in the chat. I'm also going to take a commercial break to say if you've been appreciating my Rust Belt mug, you can get it at beltmag.com in our shop, just so you know. Okay, yeah, thank you again all. Really beautiful pieces, really very clear and obvious connections to all of them. And a thread that I definitely heard throughout very clearly is this notion of ritual, whether it was sort of more broadly in this notion of reflection and renewal, or in these specific traditions that Ed and Gretchen were describing. And I'm wondering if you could also talk about, since you are all three writers, do you see writing as a ritual? And do you think that as you were writing these pieces, sort of, knowing sort of this is like the end of the year, did that feel sort of like ritualistic also? Like, does the writing process feel like that sort of magic that ritual brings is also happening? I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on that.
Well, I definitely view writing as a ritual. I write at night in very, very early morning, like 3, 4, 5 in the morning. And I love writing in the dark because I write what I see in my mind's eye. And it's like, it has to be dark. There can't be any distractions whatsoever. And so that has become my ritual. And frankly, it really started in college because I need quiet. And so I'd go to sleep early, and when everybody finally got to bed, I got up and did my work. So it's been a ritual of mine forever. I did it when I had children, and early morning was the only time I had to myself. And so I love dark at night, and I have these movies in my head, and then I just write down what I see in the darkness.
That's beautiful, and I just have to jump in that was actually how I wrote most of my book. Was at 4:45, 5 in the morning. I would just get up and write, and I lost that habit after the book got turned in. And so you're again inspiring me to get back to that, because that is such a magical moment when the rest of the world is asleep. So thanks for sharing that. What about you, Ed and Gretchen?
Yeah, I definitely, I agree with Vivian that I think writing is a ritual in itself, and I've always found writing to be tremendously regenerative. So I need to write almost every day. I can't not write. I know that every writer has their own sometimes tortured relationship to the process, and it's no different for me, obviously, but just the act of kind of, as Vivian described it, kind of taking movies from your mind and transferring it, this kind of alchemy where you're able to turn something that's so intangible as your thoughts into words, is for whatever mysterious reason something that like I am kind of compelled to do. And I feel very, I love it. And I feel very fortunate that that's something in my own life. But if we think of rituals as kind of these things that we do to center ourselves, or to maybe like remind ourselves of who we are, I guess, then that's absolutely what writing's always been for me.
I guess my rituals are much less calm and centered than these other two folks, for sure. I'm more chaotic. I tend to do two things in terms of getting that creative brain going, because I'm a marketing and advertising writer, and like writing is my day job. I have to do something to differentiate the action of sitting at my laptop typing from what I do to earn money, and so oftentimes movement helps, like sort of like a walking meditation, except that it's like walking writing almost, or maybe walking editing. So I'll if I'm stuck on a piece, I found that the answer every single time is to like set a question in my head, like what am I trying to express, what word am I looking for, what comparison, who is this character anyway? And I set the question in my head and I go for a long walk by myself, and that always brings an answer. It's never failed me. So that's one of my favorite things. I've got ants in my pants most of the time, and so moving helps. And then the other thing is that if I am going to be just settling into a writing session, I've never been one of those folks who's so delightful, who can wake up early in the morning. I'm jealous of those who can, because I do think it's an ideal time to write. But if I am sitting down for a desk session, the candle always helps. Ever since I was a kid, Any candle, scented or not, it just changes the room. It changes the mood, it changes the vibration, and I'm in a different place. In the same way, when I like get into a bubble bath, I've created like a third space. I've created another space that I can enter and exist differently in, and somehow more creatively.
I love that. And so holiday connected. Like, of course, we're there's something in adding light to a space, a new light to a space that is so transformative. Yeah, thanks. Thank you all for indulging my asking writers question. I don't see any audience questions unless I'm not seeing them, but I don't see any so far. I have more. I know, Ryan, you have a couple. I don't know if do you want to jump in with any? I'm happy to keep asking. And also if any of you want to ask each other questions.
I had a quick follow-up question to yours, because I think, Gretchen, you were talking about this movement and the way that walking and being out and about kind of is part of your ritual. And I was thinking about the ways that every one of these pieces is about the life that we build in a place, either collectively or individually. And so I wonder if each of you could talk a little bit more about the ways that your writing connects to place, is rooted in place, and or sort of transcends place in a lot of ways. I'm curious about that.
Well, I write about a place in my book that doesn't exist anymore. There's nothing there that was there when I was a child. And so it's all my memory. And it's my memory as a young child. So this book is written from a child's perspective. There's stories in the book where I'm pretty sure I'm about 4 years old. And I'm writing about what I remember, what I saw, what I could smell. And I know that because I remember the time when my siblings went to school and all the hubbub of what was going on in activity ceased as soon as they closed the door. So it was before I went to school. And so writing about a place that is just totally memory. I can't go back and research what was on this corner and is this store still there? Nothing is there. It was 450 acres and only 4 buildings remain. So everything is new. So just being able to go back and retrieve from your memory. And I often would try to verify things with my siblings because I'm one of the younger of 8. And so I had to really check myself to make sure this was memory and not creative thinking. So that has been really fascinating and invigorating for me to be able to do that and then have it verified by my siblings. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, I think that, I never particularly thought of myself as a writer of place till I started writing for Belt in some ways, I think. So thank you for that. A big part of it was when I was working on an alternative history of Pittsburgh, which when it began was basically, the argument for what I wanted to do was I wanted to write a book because I'm from Pittsburgh and I love Pittsburgh and please let me write this book. And Anne said yes. And then, one of the things I always say is, and I tell my students this, is that oftentimes you don't discover what your argument is until you've actually written whatever it is that you're writing. And then that comes from, you kind of realize what your argument is. And I realized pretty, by the time I was done with the book, that my argument about Pittsburgh was fundamentally an argument about place, and what I thought was sort of unique or special, or maybe a little ineffable, spiritual, though that's a weird word, about Pittsburgh in particular. So I do think that I return to Pittsburgh a lot in my writing, but I kind of bring the same maybe sense of how all places are charged in different sorts of ways. So I'll write about a lot of different places that I've lived or visited, and I'm very much interested in kind of what's singular about different places that people call home.
I love that idea. My writing is absolutely about place. I don't have a choice, unfortunately. because I'm sort of haunted by the ugliness of my hometown and where I grew up. And it's like not just ugly, it's like infamous for being ugly. I mean, like it's between Gary, Indiana and Chicago, Illinois, and it's sort of famous for its stink. And it's like Dante-esque smoke towers that you see from the skyway with like blue flames and orange and smoke. And so I could never live there, but I do find whenever I go back there, particularly if I'm taking the South Shore train back there, I am haunted by and also creatively prompted by passively, entering and leaving that space. And I have also thought a lot about, this might be a book, actually. I've been talking about this being a book, but I've thought about the people who lived here before the industrialists got to that land and, raped it and ruined it and took these beautiful marshes and made something ugly out of them and made this, this cancer-causing air. And I think a lot about the Potawatomi people who lived there before all of this happened. And I would say that I think about it too, because my family ended up there sort of very randomly. And it was because of factories and a cluster of Polish people that my Eastern Europeans moved here for jobs. There was no other tie that we have to this land. There's no other sense of connection. I don't go back generations. And so as I wrote about going back to land in Western Poland that I did have connection to, that I walked into a Catholic church and my Polish relatives that we've been going to church here for 600 years, was so compelling to me to have that history. I mean, that's a very privileged thing. Many people have lost those ancestral lines and don't have that. And I felt how deeply it connected me to the universe and to my family and to that land. So there's a lot more to explore there, but yes, geography, land, it's a big deal for me. In fact, it's like my main deal.
Those were beautiful responses. I have another question, if that's okay. I really would love audience to jump in if they want, but or if any of you are burning with questions. Okay, it's kind of a direct follow-up to Gretchen, to your last comment. I'm really interested in, I feel like maybe it's just because I'm more interested in it, so I'm finding it more and it's on my radar more. But I do feel like as we continue to, collectively, thank goodness, more and more know that we need to change the trajectory of the way things are going generally in the world. That there's actually a lot of looking to the past. And I think we're nuancing this notion that, that progress is always this sort of linear, like things will be better in this moment, rather than sort of noticing what I think all three of you do really beautifully is like, of course, the past was full of racism and colonialism and all of these horrible things. And also there are these pockets that we can look to. I guess this is my question, like, what are the pockets that we can look to from the past to help us do better and survive as on this earth and together? Because I think all three of the work that you all do offer us those moments. So I'm curious how you think about historical reflection as actually a tool for the future. If you do.
That's a tough one. The pockets to look to. I think certainly in my experience, it's been useful. And it's similar to what Ed said about you don't know what you're writing about often until it's written, because I didn't set out to write about the history of a neighborhood that was erased. But that's what happened because that was what was. And so I think being able to write, me as an individual, be able to write in first person about a place and an experience, I think is so beneficial for everybody. To be able to say, this is what happened, and because you never heard of it, doesn't mean it didn't exist. And that was my experience. Once I wrote this book, I heard constantly, I never heard of it. Where was it? Who were they? 20,000 people, are you kidding? What, how could that be? So being able to share this experience and as real history, I think is so important, and it's a place to start.
Yeah, I think sort of following up on Vivian's comment and also just Rachel's question and observation about knowing that things need to be done differently than we're doing them now, right? And I think that I guess the joke is it's always like every generation thinks it's the last, but sometimes it feels like it's a little bit more, right? Like writing right now is a strange, writing's always a strange activity. It's objectively like a weird way that we spend our time, I guess. But with all of that we're facing and all the things that are sort of looming, there's this kind of question of why do we do it, right? And I really like Vivian's answer there, where I think that there's something about you do it to bear witness, right? And you kind of do it for yourself to a certain extent. I mean that in the most powerful way possible, right? Like when I write, I love that people read my writing. I hope that they like my writing, but if nobody ever read my writing again, I would still write. And I think that there's something, and maybe that goes back to the ritual question. I think that it does something about how it doesn't solve those problems per se, but it does something that helps us face them, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I would just riff on that as well. I guess, bearing witness to history and trying to find out the legacy of our ancestors, especially the ones that are still with us, like, healing from those ancestral wounds also involves some, and those traumas and everything else, it also involves examining some truth and asking a lot of questions. I'm just thinking, for example, when I took this big ancestral homeland pilgrimage to Poland, we had a lot of stories, the American Kalinskis, that we told ourselves about our refugee grandparents and how heroic they were, and all of the stories that they had told us sort of in a vacuum about their families back home and their reasons for leaving. And surprise, surprise, all of that was a lot more complex than we were led to believe. Mm-hmm. And everybody knows the complexities of Polish Catholics and Jews and Germans intermingling in Poland. The Germans invading their land, for example, insisted on taking my grandfather and cousin away to fight with the German army, or they were going to take all of the land away from my ancestors. And I think hearing that story from my great aunt Anya, and having to put myself in those shoes and having to think about what happened at that point. What happened was that my grandfather and my, I guess it would have been my second cousin uncle, they went with the Germans so that their family would not lose all of their land. Then they killed the German officers 2 days later, deserted, and turned themselves into the British Army. We didn't know most of that when we first arrived in Poland. We just knew that my grandfather had fought with the English Army. Knowing those stories, understanding how close, like the German people and the Polish people in this town all knew each other before the war and had relationships, and they were neighbors, and it just sort of brought it home. It took this story out of a romantic, black and white sort of movie storytelling, and brought it home and made us consider, especially as white Americans, how we were implicated in this story, and made us want to get to more of the actual truths that only our Polish family could enlighten us with. So I'm a big fan of speaking to the ancestors however you can.
Absolutely. Thank you all for those responses. Yeah, I think just to bring it full circle, I do think that is a big mission of what we do at BELT, is to look with a lot of nuance and complexity at history, at the things that are, were really meaningful, and things we should consider, trying to keep alive or revive, and the things that we really have to reckon with. Obviously, especially white folks and descendants of settlers in particular. And so, yeah, so thank you for all of those reflections. We are almost at time. I would love to see if Ryan has any other last words. I would love if our panelists want to drop, if you want people to follow you on any social media, go to your website, remind folks of the book, link to the books you have coming out. I'd love to do that in the chat so people can copy paste those reminders. And Ryan, any other last words for us?
I want to say thanks everyone for being here, attendees, panelists, everyone. This has been just so much fun. And I do have one sort of like on our way out question that I wanted to ask the panelists. All of these pieces feel in many ways about finding meaning in a season, right? And this season has so many complexities to it. There's so much depth with the darkness and the longest night, but there's also this sort of seeking of warmth and comfort and joy. So I just wanted to ask the panelists, as we're leaving here, as a parting gift to the attendees of this event, where are you finding warmth this season? What's warming your spirit?
I find warmth in how my book has been received. I had no idea that people write to authors. I get letters and emails and people telling me how the book resonates with them. I've also learned to be alone with myself, which I do appreciate. And so COVID was not so hard on me, because I have come to enjoy my own company. And so I get a lot of pleasure out of being comfortable with myself.
Again, for me, it's my son. I get a lot of warmth from him. So I'm a relatively new dad, which means that I make mistakes continually.
That's how it works.
Yeah, exactly. But he's a blast, and he keeps me grounded, and he's hilarious. So those are all good things.
Yeah.
I find warmth in my super cuddly dog, who's like snoring on the floor a few feet away from me over there. And then my husband and I are new homeowners, sort of late in life. We became homeowners during the pandemic. We moved back to Chicago after living in California. So I'm finding a lot of comfort in, fussing about the house and hanging decorations and making plans and fixing things and all of that. And then too, I guess, hate COVID, but I do like the simplicity that it's given us around the holidays. It's not actually good to be out and about, but there's something that's really nice about waking up on Christmas morning and having it just be the three of us and keep it simple and not be racing all over the region, and just enjoying people on Zoom or phone calls or text messages, and having a lot of home time.
Ryan, do you want to answer that real quick too before we officially close?
Sure. I'm finding warmth in connections like this, in reading. I'm returning to a lot of works that BELT has published over the years, and that I've read elsewhere, that have just been comforting narratives to me, that are familiar or challenging in all the best ways, and sort of deepening my experience of the season. So I'm finding a lot of warmth in that, and connecting with writers and other readers of those pieces in meaningful ways.
Ditto to that. And also, I just read like a scientific article about how like twinkly, like white Christmas lights and twinkle lights, like actually like give us endorphins or something like that. I don't know. I didn't need a scientific
I
article.
knew it. I knew
Right?
it.
Yeah, I didn't need, Western scientific proof, but it was still kind of affirming to be like, of course I'm like warm and fuzzy about this. So that was kind of fun to know that I do like seeing all the Christmas lights all around too. So holiday, whatever, obviously general lights, holiday festive lights. So yes, thank you all so much. Oh, I'm some of these comments in the chat as well. This was really lovely. It feels very, like I said, it's a lovely sort of end of year ritual for me at this point in our second year doing it, and I'm so grateful for it. Thank you so much to the writers. Thank you to everybody who attended. You can share this video once we have it up with your friends who couldn't make it. And again, we still have over a week of our fundraiser, and it would be so helpful so we can keep telling stories and compensating writers just like this, so that we can help support regional storytelling. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.